Good morning, or depending on when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so I've made a podcast all about the Pokémon trading card game. And you're listening to PTCG Radio. Now, this is a very special week for PTCG Radio. As we record here on Tuesday, I have just reached over 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, which I think is cause for celebration. It's pretty gosh darn good as far as I'm concerned. On 1,004 as I look now. Not only that, of course, but this coming weekend is UK Nationals, which is a special show in itself. This is our pre-national show. And we are also going to be having a good chat about Nationals. Essentially about every deck which I think you should be thinking about for Nationals, both playing and playing against. And just going through that in a huge amount of detail. So lots and lots of information today. I shall keep it short as I can. But as people constantly remind me, which I'm very happy that you do, it's not annoying if it goes long. It's annoying if I go on about it being long. So I shan't. So first of all this week, we have got a bunch of news. We've got some fairly exciting news. By the way, if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, go over to YouTube and just search PTCG Radio. You'll find it very, very easily. Or Google PTCG Radio YouTube. And again, you will find it very, very easily. Thank you to those that have subscribed. And if you haven't subscribed and you are listening to this, why not? Go fix it. I am now uploading, what we got? We got up to round 5 of the tournament where Roaring Skies is legal. Remember, Roaring Skies is not legal till tomorrow, so this was an early tournament. We can see these cards in action. And you'll be getting top 8, top 4, and final games going up over the next couple of days for them. Which, you know, as far as I'm concerned, you should be pretty excited about. I'm going to be honest with you. Not only that, but I'm going to have my top 10 cards of Phantom Forces are hopefully going to go up at some time today. I very much hope they are. And again, that's going to be we are going to be having that at some point, probably just after Nationals. And in case that wasn't enough, the lovely Matt Blower and Terry Goodacre have provided me with 2 full league challenges, 4 or 5 games each of them to go up. Now, they're going to have to wait till after Nationals, by which point, of course, we're going to have slightly moved on because Roaring Skies will be legal where it wasn't for the league challenges, but 2 whole league challenges worth of fully commentated games to watch. I'm excited, and I think you should be too. So that's all what's going on my YouTube channel, PTCG Radio on YouTube. Go find it, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm willing to bet that it's going to be pretty good, and you're going to be pretty excited, as quite frankly, you should be. So rounds 1 to 5 are up there now, and I might even try and get the top 4 game up tonight if I'm feeling in a charitable mood. So moving into proper news this week, non-PTCG radio news, we have some more information about Ancient Origins. Now, Ancient Origins is going to be our next UK set coming out in August, and if you're thinking, hang on a second, Roaring Skies isn't legal till tomorrow, I know, but I like to keep you guys well caught up to date. This is going to be the equivalent of Japan's Bandit Ring set, which is not out yet, but it's coming out quite soon. So obviously, when it's released in Japan, we'll have all the information of all the new cards on here. Now, we've already talked about Hooper EX, Machamp EX, Lugia EX, and Kyurem EX, and I've already told you my thoughts on them, so go back to previous podcasts where we go through them. One thing I would like to add, there was an interesting video which popped up on YouTube, somewhere around the internet, probably YouTube, last week, where we saw a Japanese chap playing a Rayquaza Shaman deck using Hooper EX and its search for free Pokemon ability in order to help set up that Rayquaza deck, which, just a shameless plug for myself if I'm going to be honest with you, it's exactly how I said Hooper would be used. Hooper is going to make this Rayquaza deck much, much faster, but it doesn't fix the problems like bad weakness, no counter for safeguard, etc., etc. So still plenty of problems with the deck, but if you're going for the pure speed version, Hooper EX is going to help. But now we know that the 3 Megas in the set are going to be Mega Ampharos EX, Mega Tyranitar EX, and Mega Sceptile EX. And we're also going to have shiny versions of Primal Kyogre EX and Primal Groudon EX. And we can also expect shiny Mega Rayquaza EX. So, a lot of new stuff to look forward to. We also know there's going to be new ancient traits, which we're expecting because there's always new ancient traits in the sets nowadays ever since Primal Clash. the one before that, Phantom Forces. But not only that, there are going to be new special energy cards. We have no idea what they're going to be, but we've seen Double Dragon Energy coming around recently, so that's pretty exciting. Now, we've also seen, and there's nothing, again, this doesn't tell us too much about it, but we have seen the product images. And if we look at the set, we can see there is a Regirock deck and a Metagross deck. And quite frankly, Metagross, yes. Yeah, go for it. It's going to be a Regice in the set, I believe, as well. So I love it when the Regis come out to play. Makes me very happy. And the Pokemon on the boosters are Mega Tyranitar, which we're expecting because it's in the set. Hooper, which, again, we've kind of got to expect Hooper. That's what the set's based around. Shiny Mega Rayquaza. And either regular or shiny Primal Groudon, I forget which. But, all cards we knew were coming out in the set. And if you're in or around LA at any point, in June and July, there's going to be a Pokemon boutique opening in LA. But I'm not going to tell you very much about that because, quite frankly, I can't go and see it, so I don't care. We also know there's going to be Korokoro Ichiban, a video game magazine in Japan, is on June the 20th going to be dropping a new issue, and that new issue is going to have a Sableye that has an ancient trait. We don't know anything about it other than it's a Sableye, it's psychic, got 70 HP and has an ancient trait, but something to bear in mind. Sableyes, we have seen some useful Sableyes in the past. Both the Junk Hunt and the Overeager Sableyes have been good in the past, so you never know. Could be quite interesting. But we have some new cards, and these are very, very interesting. Two of them will sound very familiar indeed. Let's go for the ones that seem a bit less familiar first. First off, we have an item card called Paint Roller. Discard a stadium in play, draw one card. Now, quite frankly, there is always going to be a stadium in play at the moment. Stadium wars are a big thing in the game at the moment, and there's basically always stadiums in place. You get to draw a card. Annoying if you've got your stadium out, but a lot of the time your opponent's going to have a stadium out that you're going to want to get rid of. So Paint Roller's quite good for that as well as drawing a card. It's another card that we get which aids us with speed cards. We also have a Jolteon. It's a stage 1. It's got I suppose the attack for a lightning double colourless does 80 damage with a muscle band that's 100, which will be good for EXs, or even with a silver bangle will be 110, which does 220, which may even be good for Mega EXs. Add a laser and you'll be there. But what's more again, I'm not talking about the rotation until it's announced. I'm talking about these as they are at the moment. When the rotation comes around, we'll talk about the rotation. Stop trying to guess. It's pointless. Everyone now, the current trend on the internet is for everyone to say, I always knew, I predicted it was going to be boundaries crossed on. Which is weird, because I didn't hear any of these people saying boundaries crossed on a year ago. There's just a load of people now saying they were saying it a year ago. I never heard them. Let's not guess the rotation. Said that before. So if you're thinking, hang on a second, maybe Silver Bangle's going to rotate it or whatever, I forget which set it's from now. But if you're thinking anything like that, just hold your horses. When the rotation happens, we'll talk about it. But what's really interesting about this Jolteon is the ability Electric Effect. All Stage 1 Pokemon are now Lightning, as well as their original type. What that means is that, let's say, for instance, Donphan. Now, Donphan is a deck which Roaring Skies including Roaring Skies in the format. Donphan's in an awkward kind of position. We're going to talk about him later. One of the problems is there's an awful lot of fighting resistant Pokemon. What's going to be very interesting for Donphan is he's going to hit for weakness for Rayquaza, for Lugia, for Yveltal, etc., etc. It's going to be very, very interesting indeed. I love Donphan here. Any Stage 1 Pokemon becomes Lightning, and obviously if Rayquaza's as good as we think he's going to be, then this just adds more pressure on Rayquaza. I quite like the way that in one set they release this deck which has all the support you could ever possibly want, and then in the next set they release a card like this, which, if it's not deliberately designed solely to screw over Rayquaza, you've got to wonder why they're releasing it. It just seems like, ooh, we gave a really powerful Rayquaza. Have this. It's only for stage 1s, but any stage 1s can now hit Rayquaza for weakness. And the one that really jumps out to me is Donphan. And yes, I know Donphan may be rotated by then, but let's hold your horses until then. Any stage 1 can now hit Lugia for weakness. That makes me happy. The interesting question, of course, if you've got a fighting Pokemon and you're up against something like Rayquaza, do you go for resistance and weakness in the same hit? I don't know if it's a... Because the nearest equivalent I can remember for this was the Lantern that we saw from the Heart Gold Soul Silver sets, Lantern Prime, where you could choose to turn it... I think it was electric and you could choose to turn it water, or the other way round. So you can have electric or water. Whereas here, and again, these are only the Japanese translations, and they could be slightly wrong, or they could be retranslated into English when we get it in the UK and the US, etc. So do bear all that in mind. But as it turns out at the moment, it would be both fighting and lightning, so Rayquaza would be both weak and resistant to it, which would be very interesting to work out mathematically. But if it comes down to that, we'll have a ruling at the appropriate time. Now, let's go for new cards. One new card is Unknown. It's not Unknown R, it's just Unknown. But it may as well be Unknown R because it's exactly the same as Unknown R from Legends Awakened. I think maybe the weakness was different. I'll have to look that one up. Other than that, it's the same card. It's a 60 HP Psychic Pokemon that can do 10 damage for a colourless energy. Nobody cares because you're never going to attack with this. It's the ability. Now, it has a retreat cost of 1, and that is important. But, because if you start with it, it sucks. But it's got an ability which is awesome. The ability is called Last Will, and it reads, once during your turn, if this Pokemon is on your bench, you may discard this Pokemon and all cards attached to it. This does not count as knocking out a Pokemon. Then draw a card. I.e., it's on your bench, discard it and draw a card. That's awesome. Now, when I talked, and I'm quite proud of this episode, go back a couple of episodes, I talked about speed decks, past, present and future, and one of the examples I used of past speed decks was my Donphan deck, with which I cut UK Nationals, I want to say 4 years ago, it's a couple of years ago now. And I played 4 Unknown R in that deck, because it was a really, really good way of drawing cards. Not only that, but there was a Vileplume card around at the time, which blocked trainers for your opponent and for you. Everyone, and nobody could play trainers when that Vileplume was out. And so Unknown R allows you to draw cards under trainer lock. It's awesome. Now, there are other considerations, because back then, although we had things like Pokédraw Plus, we didn't have Acrobike, Roller Skates, Bike, etc. So, the first thing to say is, this helps speed decks. Now we've got Shaman and we've got Unknown R, speed decks can now thrive under trainer lock, and the biggest reason to use this is, it gets through trainer lock. Now, if you're thinking about ability lock, the deal is, it is turned off by Garbodor, because it's an ability. It is turned off by Silent Lab, because it's a basic Pokemon. It is not turned off by Wobbuffet, as it is a psychic Pokemon. So Garbodor, Silent Lab do turn it off. Wobbuffet does not turn it off. Just so we're clear. But there are... Now, that's essentially it. It's for speed decks, and it works under trainer lock. But... And this was only revealed, this was revealed today, the day I recorded. There's a couple comments I've seen. One comment I saw was, this is, it would be better if it was like Unknown R, because you can only discard it from the bench. Firstly, yes, you can only discard it from the bench. If you start with it in the active, you cannot discard it to draw a card. You've got to get it out of the active by manually retreating it or switching, etc. The other thing to note is, that person was not reading Unknown R properly. Unknown R also could only be used from the bench, not the active. But there's another thing that people are missing here. There are 2 advantages this has over something like Acrobike, Roller Skates, Bicycle, etc. Number 1 is, it can be used under trainer lock. The second advantage is, you get in these weird situations where, I'll give you an example. Let's say, for argument's sake, I've got a Juniper in hand. And I know I'm going to play the Juniper this turn. I've got to play the Juniper. And let's say that I've already used my energy attachment for the turn. And I've got an Acrobike in hand. Now, if I play that Acrobike, let's say I really need something like a Super Scoop Up. Now, if I play the Acrobike, I have another chance of hitting the Super Scoop Up. If I just Juniper, I don't get to play the Acrobike. and I really need the Super Scoop Up. So I'm going to play the Acrobike to try and draw the Super Scoop Up. What's really annoying is, if off the Acrobike I hit an energy or a supporter, I can't play the energy because I've already played my energy for the turn, and I can't play the supporter because I know I'm going to Juniper, I have to Juniper. So in that situation, I'm drawing a card which I don't want yet, and then I'm having to discard it. Whereas with Unknown R, I can put Unknown R on the bench, I can then play the Juniper, and if I don't hit the Super Scoop Up from the Juniper, I can then discard Unknown R to draw more cards. And if those extra cards I draw happen to be an energy or a supporter, that's okay, I've got them for next turn. So that's a kind of subtle thing about Unknown which a lot of people don't seem to be saying yet, so let me give you kind of the advanced information. Unknown R is really, really good if you want to draw more cards after you play a supporter, but you've got it in hand now. And a good example would be, I don't want to draw anything that I'm then going to have to discard with the Juniper. Or, for instance, I really want to hit the Rare Candy and the Stage 2. If I play an Acrobike, I can't hit both of them. Whereas if I play the Juniper and only hit one, I can then play the Unknown R or discard the Unknown R, and then maybe I'll hit the other bit that I need. I hope that makes sense. So that's Unknown R. Comes back to kind of, I suppose, card order, which is something I've been talking about a lot on my videos on YouTube lately. So go back to that. Now, just for the, just while we're here, I've had several people ask me about how do they get the stream from UK Nationals. Now, the deal is, this weekend at Nationals, I'm not playing, and I've played, I think, 5 years in a row. I'm not playing this year, and the reason is I'm going to be doing a little bit of presenting / commentating on the live stream. Now, I don't have the details for the live stream offhand right now. What I encourage you all to do is stay close to my Twitter, at TheWossy, TheWossy. That is how you're going to get onto my Twitter, and I am going to try and make sure that, you know, barring some kind of huge technical problem, I'm going to try and make sure that all of the information for the stream goes out on my Twitter. It will also be posted on the Burbank City Gym Facebook page, which I'm assuming the vast majority, if not all of the people listening to this use. So check my Twitter, check Burbank City Gym. I'm going to make sure that if the stream is up and running, and I really hope it is, it very much should be, I've had assurances it will, because otherwise I don't know what I'm going to be doing all day. That stream will be publicised on my Twitter and on Burbank City Gym. Now, it's going to be UK time, so, you know, bear in mind that we're quite a bit ahead of the US. I mean, all states we're ahead of, but especially the West Coast, we're very far ahead of the West Coast, like 9 hours or something silly, or maybe 6 hours, I don't know, quite a lot anyway. So do make sure that you're, you know, checking Burbank City Gym and you're checking Twitter for that, because honestly, I'm going to do my absolute darndest to make that stream really, really good. If the technology holds up, I'm hoping that I'll also be able to have Twitter up on my iPad while I'm doing the recording of the, or at least the commentating of the stream. So for the very first time, it will essentially be like live PTCG radio, where you can tweet in and ask me questions and make comments and stuff, and I can address them on the stream. So I'm not 100% on exactly how it's all working yet, but all you need to know is there's going to be a live stream. Check my Twitter at TheWossy, check Burbank City Gym, the Facebook group, and then you can kind of get in touch and ask me questions as we go. The one last card we need to talk about, I've already mentioned, Vileplume's back. This is the Vileplume, Frustrating Pollen, has the... I don't care about the attack, no one cares. It's a stage 2, and it's got the ability Frustrating Pollen. As long as this Pokemon is in play, both you and your opponent can't play item cards. Now, this was especially frustrating back in the day. We had a Spirit Tomb from the Arceus set, and what the Spirit Tomb allowed you to do was essentially it had an attack. Spirit Tomb was a basic which blocked trainers, and it had an attack which allowed you to evolve one of your bench Pokemon by searching through the deck and evolving it. So you'd start with Spirit Tomb, use Spirit Tomb to evolve Vileplume, and then in theory, turn 1, you evolve Oddish into Gloom using Spirit Tomb, and then on your second turn of the game, You go Vileplume and you're there. It was a turn 2 stage 2 without using Rare Candy, because of course when you evolved using Spiritomb's attack, it was as if, Gloom was there at the start of your next turn, ergo you didn't have to wait another turn to evolve. It was incredibly frustrating, I'm going to be honest with you. However, it opened things up. And I quite like that Pokemon's doing this. They're giving us cards like Unknown R and Paint Roller, in addition to cards like Shaymin and Acrobike and Roller Skates. We have got better cards now to use for speed decks than we have had really since 2011. And we've got more trainer locking options than we've had since the same time. We've now got, if you want to go trainer lock, we've got Seismitoad's Quaking Punch, and we've got Trevenant, the stage 1 that can be got on the very first turn of the game with Wally. And we've got Vileplume. Now, the weird thing is that Vileplume locks you. So you can't use trainers either. So you make an almost trainer-free deck. But the other advantage with Vileplume is that status conditions. And the general way, and people made decks with Vileplume a lot. And essentially, the way it would work was, I am going to inflict status conditions and you're going to be trainer locked. Very similar, in fact, to the Quaking Punch Hypnotoxic Laser combo. So there was an Excelgor that did auto paralysis and poison, then you shuffled it back into the deck, and you would have a Vileplume out so that when you did the paralysis and poison, they were trainer locked by the Vileplume. You are going to see some play. It is a very frustrating card, and it is one which, quite frankly, people are going to make. People are really going to go for this deck. So what I'm going to do now that Nationals is coming up, I have split all the decks I can think of that are relevant into 2 categories, new decks and old decks. And I'm just going to give you a couple of sentences on each of them. And I'm going to give you a quick discussion of their strengths, their weaknesses, and whether they are viable for Nationals. Now, for those of you that have later national championships that aren't coming up for a few weeks, and I know that is most of you, then the good news is that next week we're going to be talking all about the results from UK Nationals, and hopefully I'm going to get some interviews and all stuff like that. And hopefully we're going to be able to give you lots more information, and then as more tournaments happen and I learn more stuff and I speak to more people, then over time I'm going to be able to give you much better informed, fuller opinions of these. Today, I'm basically just going to go through every deck and tell you what I think. I could be wrong. I think I've got a fairly good track record, but at the end of the day, this is a brand new format. I've talked to a lot of players. I've read a lot of stuff on the internet. I've been to a tournament with very good players. Check my YouTube channel, shameless plug, where I've seen these decks in action. I've learned a lot about them. But at the end of the day, you can never guess what other people are going to think of. You can never guess what decks are going to come up. Now, if I remember correctly, I have guessed the winner of Nationals correctly in the UK every year. So watch as this year I break the streak, because there's really 2 decks that I like above all others. Maybe 3, probably 2. Anyway, let's go through this. So, in terms of new decks, and I'm going to try and be a bit quicker on the new decks, because I went through a lot of the new decks last week and previously, so again, I am building on a lot of what I've said in previous podcasts here. So if you're not a regular listener, go back for the last few, have a listen, stick them on an iPad, go for a run, go for a drive, go for a nice leisurely stroll, lay down somewhere comfy and listen, just to kind of, get some more detail on some of these decks. So starting off then, Trevenant Shaymin. This is the Trevenant, which is a stage 1 that blocks trainers, and you can get it up on turn 1 of the game with Wally. If you want to see this game in action, you can see Scott Burgess playing it to almost perfection on a couple of the videos from that Roaring Skies tournament on my YouTube channel. I like this deck. You do 60 damage for free energy, one of which is a double colourless, and 20 to 2 bench Pokemon. That's up to 80 with Muscle Band, and you've got Laser, and you can have Trainer Lock from turn 1 of the game. If you go first and you've got a Phantump in the active and then play a Wally as your supporter, you can Trainer Lock them for the entire game. Now, it only gives Trainer Lock if Trevenant's active, so of course your opponent can just Lysandre around it, but that means that every turn they get trainers, they've already used their supporter. It can have problems against some decks, especially, if you play against a Groudon deck and they start one-hit KOing you, you're not going to get the 2 energy out. When you can't get 2 separate energy attachments to a Trevenant, then you've got to rely on Shaman to attack, and you're maxing out at 50 per turn, which probably isn't going to be enough against a deck which is already one-hit KOing your Trevenants. I love this Trevenant deck. It would be in my top 3 choices if I was going to be playing at Nationals this coming weekend. It's Trainer Lock. It's not the most powerful deck ever, but it's straightforward, it's simple, you've got space to play energy denial cards, and at the end of the day, when you can Trainer Lock people for the entire game, you're going to beat a bunch of people just because they can't draw anything. I really, really like this deck. It can struggle against any deck that can get KOs faster than you can attach, energy to your Trevenant, because if your Trevenant goes down and you haven't got 2 energy on the next one, by the time you get to attacking, it can hurt. But then again, in a lot of those games, you've got enough time to be able to get the energy back. It still struggles against Groudon, because Groudon, you can't get rid of their energy, and you can't laser them when you get a Primal Groudon up, and honestly, one Primal Groudon can run through you. Another deck, and I'm going to start with my top 3 decks, I should have made that clear. Another deck I love, Seismitoad Shaman. This deck is super fast and super consistent. It plays Crushing Hammer, Enhanced Hammer, Xerasic, Team Flare Grunt to get rid of all your energy. It plays Laser Verbank to add damage and poison you, and of course to put you asleep. And if you're asleep and you haven't got any energy, then it's going to be a long old road forward. Not to mention, of course, that, they're also playing Super Scooper. Now again, I can see this deck struggling against Groudon, because you can't get rid of their energy when they Primal Evolve, and you can't laser them when they get up, and 50 damage a turn, that's 30 for Quaking Punch plus 20 for the Muscle Band, is not going to be enough to KO a Groudon before you lose the game. That's assuming that the Groudon player can get nicely set up under Trainer Lock, and that is a big if. It's also a very, very flippy deck. And I need to point that out. It's a very, very flippy deck. If you can't hit heads on your Crushing Hammer, on your Super Scoop Up, on your Laser, etc., you are going to struggle. And you can see this deck being played on my YouTube channel by Ryan Morehouse. And you will see that when he hits heads on flips, it's very, very good. But when he has a little patch of tails on flips, it really, really hurts. I really like this Seismitoad deck. It's simple, it's straightforward, it just stops your opponent playing. And the third of my decks which I would be considering is not the colourless Rayquaza deck, it's Groudon. And the only problem I find with Groudon is it's a little bit slow. It takes 4 energy attachments, because you can't use double colourless energy. It takes 4 energy attachments to get going. And even though you can, in theory, get a Primal Groudon out in 1 turn with 3 Mega Turbo and your energy attachment, the reality is you're not going to. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the only build worth playing for Nationals, at least this early on in the format with the information we have at the moment, is Groudon Wobbuffet. And it's a similar kind of thing to I said to Trevenant. You leave the Wobbuffet in the active, and as long as it's in the active, all non-psychic Pokemon have their abilities turned off. And yeah, just like Trevenant, your opponent can Lissandra around it, but it means every turn they have abilities, they've already used their supporter, so their options are going to be limited. They can Shaman, but they can't support her. Shaman is going to be absolutely everywhere this year at Nationals. Decks are essentially going to fall into 3 camps. I don't play Shaman because I haven't got any, I can't afford them yet, I haven't been able to find them, etc. You're going to get outsped by every other deck that has got Shaman, I'm sorry. I've got Shaman, look how fast my deck is. And I am consciously not playing Shaman, but I'm playing Wobbuffet or Silent Labs or something else to pick on the decks that do play Shaman. I just talked about the Toad deck and how fast and consistent it is, and the reason is Shaman and Super Scoop Ups. Play a Shaman, draw some cards, play a Shaman, draw some cards, Super Scoop Up, pick up the Shaman, use the Shaman, draw some cards, etc, etc, etc. I've seen these decks draw 30 or 40 cards a turn, they're crazy. Groudon stops you doing that. The one big problem with Groudon is you need 4 energy on a mega evolved Pokemon. And when it goes down, you better have another one ready to go. You get a Primal Groudon out against a Seismitoad, you're going to win. because you're going to one-hit KO 3 Seismitoads in a row before they 5-hit KO you. Because remember, that Omega barrier means they can't get rid of your energy and they can't poison you. But there are several turns where they can stop you, and before you Primal Evolve, you can be Lysandre'd up, you can be lasered, you can have the energy taken off. As soon as you Primal Evolve, no Lysandre, no laser, etc. But until then, you're vulnerable. The other problem I see with this deck is, against the other big EX decks, Colourless Rayquaza, Dragon Rayquaza, Virizion Genesect, they are all going to have enough time to set up against you unless, Wobbuffet really slows them down too much. And when they do, you're just trading KOs. Except, it's much easier to get a double Colourless Energy and a single Mega Turbo for a Colourless Rayquaza deck than it is for an Energy and 3 Mega Turbo for the Groudon deck. The one saving grace here, of course, is Focus Sash. While you've got a Focus Sash attacked, that Colourless Rayquaza, the Genesect, the Dragon Rayquaza, none of them can one-hit KO you. You'll be left with 10 HP and your Focus Sash will be discarded. So, gives it a bit of an edge, but that's the only thing I see about Groudon. It is slow, and against decks that one-hit KO, they can often be one-hit KOing faster than you. So when it comes down to it, they're going to be able to refresh every turn and you might not. Focus Sash can help to even that, but then of course if you've got any damage on you, Focus Sash won't work, and they can just use Startling Megaphone to get rid of it. Those are the 3 decks that I would seriously be considering. Here are the other new decks. Colourless Rayquaza, we've talked about ad infinitum, so I'm not going to add too much to this. What I'm going to say is, I don't think this deck is going to win Nationals. I think it's going to see a lot of play. I think it's going to top cut Nationals. I think some people are going to do very good with this deck, very well with this deck, I should say. But there are serious problems with this deck, and essentially it comes down to one of 2 things. If you're playing the speed version, there are too many problems. You've got a glaring weakness to Lightning, Manectric, Raichu, etc. run through you. You have no answer to a Safeguard Pokemon, so a Safeguard Pokemon that can attack will just win the game instantly for your opponent. And of course, bad starts can happen. Especially against something like Trevenant or Wobbuffet, which is going to stop you playing. So the alternative is you build in a less Shaymin/Trainer Draw reliant list with Altaria, etc., but then you're a little bit slow and you're kind of defeating the object of the deck in the first place. If you play the speed version and you don't hit bad matchups, you could end up coasting into Top Cut very easily. But I don't think you'll get through Top Cut without facing a deck which can take you down. Dragon Rayquaza, I like it because it doesn't have the problems that Rayquaza has. It's got a better weakness, Metal. There'll be some Metal, but not as much as I expect there to be Lightning. It's got a natural safeguard counter in the Reshiram that attacks energy with the ability. But the fact of the matter is, it's a little bit slow. It takes 4 energy, and you can use Double Dragon, which is just 2 energy to any dragon. You can use Mega Turbo to attach 1 basic energy from the bench to one of your Mega Evolved Pokemon. And you can use Reshiram to attach a fire energy to one of your dragon Pokemon as long as he's active. But to consistently be dragging all of this stuff out, I've seen these decks being tested. I played against one in that Roaring Skies tournament, and honestly, if it doesn't go off, it can hurt. The other problem with a lot of these decks is, if you play against something like a humble Donphan deck, well, the big problem is that it's very hard. I mean, I played Donphan against the Dragon Rayquaza deck, and even when he went off, well, even if he can get a Donphan in the active, you're doing 200 damage or 300 damage and discarding 2 energy to take 1 prize. Most of the time I've got a Focus Sash or a Life Dew or I've got a Robo Sub active, and you're not actually taking any prizes. And it's if you're one hit KOing EXs, it's worth putting all the effort in. If you're not, you're running into problems. If you've got a consistent list, I probably prefer this to Colourless Rayquaza, I'm going to be honest with you. But you could struggle against non-EX decks. The new Latios card, it's got a lot of speed, but it runs out of steam too quickly, and I cannot wholeheartedly recommend it. Yes, it can donk. Yes, it can snipe Shaman's off the bench, but the new Latios, I don't like it enough. Another deck which I'm really not into, and I've written a little bullet pointed list of all the decks I want to talk about, and I've just put a little something in brackets next to all of them. And what I've put next to Gal ADX is not taking it seriously. And if you are a person who likes Gal ADX and you think I'm wrong, this is a personal slight against you. I mean, it's clearly not, but it may well feel this way. I don't think Gal ADX is good enough. Now, Gal ADX is a spread deck. It does a bunch of damage to every Pokemon that's already got damage on it, which is fine, except Mr. Mime will completely block this. There is a stadium that blocks bench damage. So there's all the reasons to block the bench damage. Not to mention, we've got people that can heal, and any deck that heals will go against this. It's 30 damage to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon that has any damage counters on it. I like that it attacks for 2 energy if you've got a Dimension Valley out, but you have to play it as a spread deck, and with so much that protects the bench and so much healing, I mean, for instance, let's say you're playing against a Seismitoad deck. Well, anything that's about to die is just going to be super scoop-upped. Not to mention, of course, the fact that you're going to be massively slowed down by Trainer Lock. If you're playing against a Trevenant deck, well, you're going to be Trainer Locked, and, you know, you're playing against Shamans that can just switch back into the hand. I don't buy it. Plus, of course, 30 damage to the bench, it takes a long time to kill anything. I'm not saying it's a terrible deck. I'm not saying nobody is going to top cut Nationals with this deck. What I am saying is, it's not a deck that I can recommend to the average player. Now, one deck I want to see people play, and this is I suppose the real wild card of all the new decks. This Shedinja deck. The deck. Shedinja being a 30 HP Pokemon that can do 50 damage times the amount of damage counters on it. Now, obviously, you play this with Mew, and you use the Frozen City, there we go. The Frozen City Rainbow Energy combo where you attach the energy and do 30 damage to yourself. With a Muscle Band, you're then doing 170 damage. You can do this turn 1 of the game, because you can use Wally to get your Shedinja out on turn 1 of the game. I love this deck. I want it to be good. But you're relying on what will then be 90 HP Stage 1 as your main attacker. You're relying on having EX as your main attacker, which gives up 2 prizes. You're going to need to have a Stage 1 on your bench at all times. You know, what people can do is essentially just kill your Shedinja, and then Mew can't have any worthwhile attacks. You need to use your Wally to get the Shedinja out on turn 1, so you're going to need to try and get the Frozen City and the Rainbow Energy and the Mew in the active and the Muscle Band without using your supporter for the turn, because you've used your Wally to get your Shedinja out. I really do think this deck's got legs. I think this deck is the new Night March. And, spoiler alert, it's made my top 10 cards of Phantom Forces, at least with my current list. I might end up redoing the list, because I'm not going to get it up for at least a week yet. But as it stands at the moment, it's made my top 10. I like this card. I think it's a deck which is at least going to beat a bunch of stuff. There's too many problems. It isn't, something simple like Donphan is just going to KO the Mew so quickly that they're taking 1 prize, just plain isn't going to be worth it. Are you going to be able to get everything you need against Seismitoad? Bearing in mind, Seismitoad is going to kill that Mew some quickly. And, 170 damage isn't going to do it against Seismitoad. And the answer is maybe. Maybe you just put the Mew active and the Seismitoad does 50 damage and you one-hit KO the Seismitoad. I am not saying it's not a viable deck. It is, I think, a viable deck. I just haven't seen enough from it. I want it to be good. I think it can be good. And I want to see someone go and win Nationals with Shedinja. So, I've got my little list of decks to be different. I've got Flareon and Raichu down as my decks to be different. Honestly, I quite like Shedinja. It is a combo-based deck. And that means you need the Shedinja, you need the Mew, you need the damage on the Mew. And if you lose any one of those elements, the deck falls apart. But I really do think it's worth at least playing with. Because honestly, I think there are going to be a bunch of people over the next few weeks that played us at Nationals, and people are entirely unprepared for it. The last new deck I want to mention is Raichu / Stage 1s, and I don't know how this deck is going to look, but essentially, you play Wally, you get Raichu out, you attach a double colourless energy, and you destroy Shaymins, you destroy Rayquazas. The one piece of advice I'll give you is, if you're playing this deck, play Pokemon Catcher, because you're going to need to be killing Shaymins to really make the most of this deck, especially if it's based around Raichu, and you are not going to consistently be able to, set up and use Lysandre. So by all means, play a Lysandre or two, but you really want to be playing Pokemon Catcher as well. You could play almost anything. You could put a Flareon in there, you could put a Leafeon in there, you wouldn't even need Wally if you played basic Grass Energy. And because you can just evolve the Eevee using its ability with the Grass Energy into a Leafeon. Don't also sleep on the fact that you can use any basic energy you like here. So I would be a fan of playing, maybe Raichu and putting in the, maybe putting in a Ninetales to use Bright Look or something along those lines. There's a lot you can do with this deck. The obvious ones are the Evolutions and Raichu. But the one thing that this does allow you to do quite nicely, and I believe the Bright Look Ninetales is still in the format by virtue of the black and white promo, if I remember correctly. So, something that can be done. I think that black and white promo is still in the format. I think it is. That's the 20 damage for a fire energy, 50 more for each special condition. So you'd play a laser and hope to hit heads on both, and then you'd be using Burbank City Gem, and you'd be using Silver Bangle to one-hit KO EXs. And let's not forget, of course, that you've got Bright Look. And heck, maybe if you've got Bright Look, you don't need catches as well. So, it's an interesting deck. I don't know how it's going to look. The one advantage is, if you've got anything you're interested in, or okay, let's put it this way, you can have a look at what you think your opponents are going to play. If you're really worried about Dragon Rayquaza, put a Metal Pokemon in. If you're really worried about something like Mewtwo, you can put a Psychic Pokemon in, etc, etc. So now, let's have a quick look at the old decks. So we haven't talked about how they've been affected by Roaring Skies, so I'll do that nice and quickly as I talk about whether they're viable for Nationals this year. The first thing I really want to point out here is that, as far as I'm concerned, all old versions of Seismitoad are dead. Now, that's not strictly true, and maybe Seismitoad Gardevoir is going to work, maybe Seismitoad Slurpluff's going to work. Heck, if you have a look at my the Roaring Skies tournament I popped on my YouTube channel, you'll see there's a lovely chap called Sid there who's playing a very strange Seismitoad list with Dusknoir and Quillfish and Mewtwo and all sorts of fun goodies. And he's a very good deck. He does quite well in the tournament. No spoilers, but I'll tell you, he at least made it into the top 8 with that deck, admittedly as the 8th seed. What I am saying is, I don't think any version of Seismitoad is better than the ridiculously fast Seismitoad Shaymin deck. And for that reason, I really cannot encourage you to play any other Toad decks. And honestly, I don't think the good players will be playing other Toad decks. Looking at metal decks, you've got some advantages here. You've got things like Aegislash. And if we look at all the funky new Pokemon, the kind of decks I'm talking about, well, the Trevenant deck needs DCE, as does Seismitoad, as does Rayquaza. The Groudon decks are generally going to be playing Strong Energy. So you've got all of these Pokemon that rely on Special Energy, and the Aegislash will stop you killing it if it's got Special Energy. We've got Mega Aggron, which allows you to do 240 damage, which can potentially KO an EX. You've got Bronzong moving along there, which is able to allow you to attach a bunch more energy and get going. You've got Dialga that for 4 energy can do 170 damage. You've got Cobalion that's got things like the Iron Breaker, which stops the defending Pokemon attacking the next turn, etc. There are good blockers and big attackers, but it's also slow and it's got a lot of problems. Flareon is still a thing, and Flareon will eat this deck alive. Groudon, if it gets going, is going to run through you. Rayquaza is faster and will probably run through you. Ability lock is a thing and is going to be a problem, but I still like it. The other deck I want to mention here is Fairies, and it's pretty much the same thing. It's not fast enough, and it's got a bunch of problems, but it's got Geomancy, which allows you to just attach a bunch of energy using Xerneas. But it's very, very similar to the Metal deck. It's not really worried about your opponent getting rid of energy, because you can just put loads on / just keep replenishing it. It's got some really big attackers. Here we're talking Mega Gardevoir, which can do a bunch of damage and actually one-hit KO the Mega EXs. And it's got a bunch of options. Although it doesn't have the Aegislash, which is a bit of a pain. Although, to be honest, you can put Aegislash in Fairies if you put in a couple Rainbow Energy. The biggest problem here is exactly like I said with Metal. It's too slow and it's got a bunch of problems, like I've mentioned. Let's not remember that the German and Austrian nationals, both Fairies and Metal, had a good showing. People are now starting to learn how to make these decks and use them. And just because Roaring Skies is now legal, or at least will be by the time you hear this, the vast majority of you, doesn't mean that it's suddenly rubbish. Night March hasn't changed. Night March is exactly the same as it always was. It's really good against EX heavy decks, and it really struggles against Stage 1 decks, because you're trading one-hit KOs, but it's easier for them to do so than you a lot of the time. And it's really vulnerable to a combination of Trainer Lock and Lissandra's Trump card. And as previously mentioned in this podcast several times, you can expect a healthy dose of Trainer Lock. So yeah, Night March, it's good as a contrarian deck, but non-EX, and if you keep playing against your Rayquazas, your Groudons, etc. all day, you're going to have a field day. Other decks, maybe not so much. Donphan, I love Donphan, but honestly, I cannot wholeheartedly, or even half-heartedly, to be honest, advise you play it at Nationals. And this makes me very sad, because Donphan is a deck I've really got to grips with. It gave me my only regional top cut this year. I love it. The problem is there's two ways to build it. Way number one is I'm going to go super fast like I've been playing it lately. And that's really good against basically anything other than Trainer Lock. Your non-EX decks like Night March and Tool Drop, you're just winning the prize trade because you're one-hit KOing every turn, and they're having to deal with your Focus Sash, your Life Dew, your Robo Sub. They're essentially having to Lissandra for every single prize. And you might even be able to set up turns where all you've got is Pokemon that have got Focus Sash or Life Dew attached, or Robo Sub, and they can't even Lissandra for a prize. I've had turns like that. They're amazing. And it's really good against big EX decks. Because again, they've got to Lissandra for every prize they take, and even then it might not work. And you're 2 or 3 hit KOing them, where they might not, for 2 prizes, where they might not be taking a prize every other turn. But that fast version cannot stand up to Trainer Lock. Like, at all. It gets destroyed. The other option is to play a slower Donphan deck, and you put a 1-1 Groudon line, or more potentially, and that allows you to stand up to things like Seismitoad. It really helps the Seismitoad matchup, as I mentioned on the podcast before. But then you lose the speed element, and if you're putting in cards like Switch, because I played no Ultra Ball, no Switch in my Donphan list, because the only Pokemon in it were Hawlucha, who's got free retreat, and Donphan, who hits and then retreats to the bench. And my deck was so fast, I literally didn't use Ultra Ball. I had 1 Corinna. That was the only search card I had in my entire deck. But you'd go through so fast it wasn't a problem. As soon as you start putting in a 1-1 Groudon list, then you've got to put Pokemon search cards in, you've got to put switches in. You're losing some of your tricks, and you're losing some of your speed. So you fix some problems, but you introduce others. You're not quite so good against the non-EX decks because you don't have the speed advantage you used to have, and you're introducing something like a Groudon which can be Lissandra'd up before you Primal Evolve it. Not only that, but you're potentially getting rid of Pokemon catchers because you haven't got room anymore, and all sorts. And you're just losing a lot of the fun there. I mean, honestly, if you had to play a version for Nats, you probably have to go the slower Mega Groudon route, or Primal Groudon. But even then, I'd rather just play Primal Groudon Wobbuffet. which incidentally has a really good Seismitoad matchup. Manectric, I love. I just love Manectric. It heals with, what do you call it? Rough Seas, which is really quite good. And it hits for weakness on Seismitoad, and you can put in non-EX attackers like Kyurem, and it gets its energy back. I have two things to say about this. Firstly, if you tell me this has got a really good Seismitoad matchup because you can just replenish energy, no. There will be games where they hit so many Crushing Hammer heads because they can flip 2, 3, 4 a turn. Heck, potentially even more than that if they trump card and keep playing Shaman. And you can only replenish energy when you've got 2 energy on, and you might never have 2 energy on. But other than that, yes, it has a good Seismitoad matchup. It has a lot of good matchups. Has a terrible Groudon matchup, in that Groudon will destroy you very easily. I still like Manectric. Manectric, it was going to be, before I really started looking into the format, when I was just kind of throwing ideas around, before I started really talking heavily to other players, Manectric was going to be what I was going to play for Nationals. Started trading for some Manectric in case. This was before I had it confirmed I was going to be commentating Nationals. But honestly, I mean, I had the deck all made up, ready for this tournament at the weekend, the Roaring Skies one, and I couldn't bring myself to play it mainly because of Groudon. Now, ironically, I would have done better than I would have with Donphan at that tournament, but I think it's one of those decks that can do well if you hit good matchups. But at Nationals, is that really what you want to be relying on? So, 5 to go. Let's do this nice and quickly. We have Flareon. It's a good counter deck. It's a counter deck. As long as you're playing against decks that you counter, you're fine. Anything else is very, very bad. And with a format this young, I really don't think that you can actually afford to play a counter deck like this. And I speak as someone that played Flareon at the ECC and did well with it, but this was in a format where essentially I could counter everything but Lugia. And even then I had an option for Lugia. It wasn't good, but I had something. And that's how I managed to make, 5th at a very big tournament. Because the format, now this was the last tournament before X and Y came out. I think in the world, at least the last big one. So the format was very mature. I was able to predict the metagame pretty much exactly, and it was narrow enough that it was possible. I don't think Flareon's a good bet now. I don't think it's going to be great against Rayquaza, if Rayquaza gets off fast enough. I don't think it's going to be good against Seismitoad, against a good Seismitoad player. There was a game with Shaman against Flareon. Again, watch it on my YouTube channel. You'll learn something, hopefully. It's going to have an awesome Groudon matchup. Because Leafeon does have a good Groudon matchup. Groudon can't keep energy off the field like Seismitoad can. Other than that, it's not good enough. Executor, I'm just going to be quick about this one. Executor block supporters, especially now that Shaman's out. We've got so much non-supporter draw. Supporters aren't as important. Executor is nowhere near as good as it was. If you really want to play an annoying deck, play Trevenant or play Seismitoad. Executor is now worse than both of them. Virizion Genesect, it's too slow. It's got good typing, so it's still going to beat Groudon. It's not even got that good a Seismitoad matchup now, because these Seismitoad Shaman decks are so fast that they're going to be able to hit Megaphone, they're going to be able to hit Headringer. You are going to have free energy on your Virizion to get your first Emerald Slash, and quite frankly, your opponent is going to hit, so Seismitoad player is going to be able to hit heads on Crushing Hammer. If you are playing Virizion Genesect, if you really want to play it for Nationals, I cannot endorse this decision, but play double colourless energy. And that way, as soon as they start missing Crushing Hammers and you've got one grass energy on Virizion, you can then attach a double colourless energy and you'll be able to Emerald Slash even if there is a Headringer on your Virizion. Having said that, your opponent can still hit Crushing Hammers on your Genesects, and they can still hit Enhanced Hammer on your Plasma Energy. If you think I'm exaggerating about how good some of these Seismitoad decks are, I'm really not. There will be plenty of them that don't hit the heads, but some of them that will. And it's going to be just like a few years ago when Darkrai Hammers was all the rage. We had Crushing Hammer and we had Junk Arm. Junk Arm was Dowsing Machine for those that weren't playing back then, except it wasn't an ace-spec, so you could have 4 of it in your deck. So you could have 4 Enhanced Hammer, 4 Crushing Hammer, and 4 Dowsing Machine to turn into them. It was redonkulous. So what would happen basically was that you would have essentially up to 12 hammers a game. And people that hit heads on all their Crushing Hammer did really well with this deck, and people that hit tails, sorry Mike Lamb, did not do very well with this deck. Cannot stress this enough. Any deck that really relies on having multiple energy on the field and can only single attach, at least for a certain period of time, I really don't like in this format. Manectric gets a pass because it can use Mega Turbo, and because even if you can never get the Mega going, it's got a decent attack for 1 energy. Outside of that, I really can't advise Rizzy and Genesect. Yveltal, the format's just kind of moved on. All the electric decks that are going to counter Rayquaza will counter Yveltal. Yveltal needs 2 energy attachments to get going. It can't use Mega Turbo. It's not really as fast as Yveltal. It doesn't have, as Rayquaza. It doesn't have Dark Patch anymore. It's going to really struggle against Primal Groudon. It's going to struggle against the Seismitoad decks with all of their hammers. It's not going to one-hit KO. So the Seismitoad decks are just going to be able to play Super Scoop Up. No one's playing it anymore, and honestly, it's not that the deck's gotten any worse, it's that the matchups have gotten worse. I wouldn't pick it against Toad Shaman. I wouldn't pick it against... actually, I would pick it against Trevenant. It would destroy Trevenant. I wouldn't pick it against Groudon. I wouldn't pick it against Colourless Rayquaza. I wouldn't pick it against these Raichu Stage 1 decks. I wouldn't pick it against Manectric. It's just not... the format's moved on. And the last old deck, and I forgot about this one, I've just added it to the end of the list as I'm recording here, Primal Kyogre. It didn't get on the list because it didn't do well at any of the tournaments the last few weeks. I think this could be good now. You could play it basically like Groudon, I suppose, with Wobbuffet. Just play Kyogre Wobbuffet, why not? And the theory is exactly the same. And I suppose if we compare Kyogre to Groudon, there are a couple things to say. Firstly, I don't like the support Pokemon as much, because you don't have... you don't have Hawlucha. You don't have Scorched Earth, which allows you to discard a fighting energy and draw 2 cards, so the deck's not going to be quite as fast. But you do have the healing with Rough Seas. Heal 30 from all of your Pokemon every turn. Won't work on Wobbuffet though, which does make Wobbuffet a slightly worse thing in this deck. Your opponent can kill the Wobbuffet. But then you've got the Ancient trait, which allows you to attach 2 energy per turn. But you don't have the Ancient trait, which stops you being lasered and have the energy knocked off. And that's why I'd go for Groudon. You're immune to lasers. You're immune to getting all the energy knocked off. You're immune to being Lysandred into the active until you're ready. If this Kyogre deck comes up against a Seismitoad, you're Lysandred into the active whenever they want, and they can start getting rid of your energy and lasering you. They can't do that to Groudon. I do like Rough Seas. And I do like the fact that it hits all the EXs on the bench and is going to start destroying Shamans quite quickly. And I like the fact that you can attach 2 energy per turn. But I much prefer Groudon's Ancient trait. I like the Scorched Earth for Groudon. And I like the fact that you can use something like Hawlucha. So if you're really short of energy, you can just stick a Hawlucha up and hit for... 60 damage, 80 with a strong energy, or 100 with a fighting stadium, or although you probably wouldn't be playing that, but you get where I'm going with this. So, they are all the decks I think you should be considering. And given that we've just gone through Trevenant, New Seismitoad, Groudon, Colourless Rayquaza, Dragon Rayquaza, Latios, Gallade, Raichu Stage 1s, Shedinja, the old Toad decks, Metal, Fairies, Nightmarch, Donphan, Manectric, Flareon, Executor, Virgin, Yveltal, and Kyogre. Even if I've missed a deck or two, I think I've been pretty exhaustive, if I'm honest. So, what do you play for Nationals? Now, I've got this down to 3 lists. The ones I would advise, the ones I wouldn't even try, and the ones to have a go at if you're feeling a bit contrarian, if you're feeling a bit different. The ones I would not even try. Yveltal, it doesn't have the good matchups it used to. For Izzy and Genesect, I don't care how consistent it is too slow and its good matchups are too spread out nowadays. Gal ADX, I don't like spread decks in this format. And Executor. We're not as reliant on supporters as we were. Play Trevenant or Seismitoad. If you want to be a bit contrarian, I would go maybe Flareon, maybe Raichu, or maybe Shedinja. All of those are decks that a lot of players will not be prepared for, will not be expecting to see, and may well end up losing because either they don't have the cards in their deck to do it, or they do, they're just not prepared. They make silly misplays. I have 4 decks, which I think are worth playing this year at Nationals. Trevenant, because turn 1 Trainer Lock, i.e. Perpetual all-game Trainer Lock, is just too damn good. And you will win a lot of games on that alone. Groudon, because Wobbuffet is hilarious against decks that rely on Shaman. And yeah, there's going to be some games where you don't have Wobbuffet. But in order for them to have Shaman on the first turn of the game, they have got to go first and hope you don't start Wobbuffet. Because if you go first, you're going to be able to get the Wobbuffet in the active most of the time. And if they go first, you might start Wobbuffet anyway. And once you get Primal Groudon going, it beats everything. Unless they can consistently one-hit KO you and refresh faster than you. And let's face it, decks like Rayquaza might be able to. And even then, you've got Focus Sash. Manectric, because yes, it's got problems with Groudon. Yes, it can fall prey to having all your energy knocked off. I think this is more a pet project of mine. So this really goes as a 4th deck, which I'm going to recommend. But it heals with Rough Seas. It's fast. If you can just have one turn where you can use the Mega EX, you can attach energy to the bench, and then you're set for the game, unlike other things like Virizion and Genesect, where one turn of Emerald Slash will not set you for the game, because you can just, use the attack to put 2 energy on a bench Mega Manectric, and so on and so forth. And just keep doing that every turn, hitting for 110, while healing. And of course, you've got type advantage on things like Rayquaza and Shaman. I'd play Catcher with Manectric as well, just because, again, you're relying on killing these Shaman for some easy late-game prizes. But the deck which I probably suggest the most is Seismitoad Shaman. It's not a fun deck. Your friends will hate you. Your opponents will hate you. And to be honest, you'll probably hate yourself a little bit for playing it. But if you play this deck and hit even 50% heads, and you've got a consistent list which is setting up and going, honestly, I don't see how you lose. It's just too good. There's just too much you can do. Because you're healing with Super Scoop Up, and you're getting rid of all their energy, and you're poisoning them, and maybe putting them to sleep. There's just too much good stuff going. Now, I honestly, in other years, the year I predicted Eels was going to win, it was obvious. And when I said Evil Tower was going to win, it was fairly obvious. I've been, to be honest, I've had a really good idea what's going to win Nationals every year I've done this podcast. This is the 4th Nationals for which I've been doing this podcast. And also, thank you all for still listening to this, because honestly, I would not still be bothering to do this. I get about 500 listeners every week through my various, YouTube and SoundCloud and iTunes and all of that. So, thank you all for listening to give me the impetus to keep doing this week on week. I keep knocking my spit guard down, if you pop shield, whatever you want to call it, if that's what you're hearing. So but this year I really don't have a good thing. Honestly, I think it's either going to be Groudon or it's going to be Shaman, and my reasoning is this: I think that if Seismitoad Shaman gets going and hits a bunch of heads, I honestly don't think it will lose to anything except Groudon. Because all of your laser and getting rid of energy and Lysandra shenanigans ain't working when I've got my Primal Groudon out and you're not doing enough damage while I'm one-hit KOing you. And yes, you can just Lysandra out a Groudon before I Primal Evolve it, But honestly, I can just put 2 on the bench and Primal Evolve the one you don't Lysandra up, and at the end of the day, I don't mind if I go down even 4 prizes. Because when I get a Primal Groudon out, you are 6 hit KOing me. Sorry, you are 5 hit KOing me. And I'm 1 hit KOing whatever you've got for 2 prizes. And you can't get rid of my energy or laser me. So I don't care if you kill 2 early Wobbuffets and you kill an early Groudon. Because unlike a lot of other decks, you ain't killing the first Primal Groudon. Not unless it's half dead when I get it out, and then I've just been playing it wrong. Because if you're half killing one, I'm starting on another one. Also, I'm sure you figured this out. Play Scramble Switch as your ace spec. I know it's not going to work against Seismitoad, but play Scramble Switch. So, honestly, I'm going to have to say Seismitoad, which is kind of boring, but sorry. I really do believe Seismitoad is going to win UK Nationals. Then that's a lie. I don't really believe it's going to win Nationals. I don't know why I said that. But if I had to if I had to give a prediction, I don't give a prediction for US Nats for some reason, but I've predicted UK Nats every year, and I think this is the year I'm going to be wrong. But the realist in me says Seismitoad. I think if it's not Seismitoad, it's going to be Groudon. But maybe there's a Rayquaza deck that just comes out and goes off every game and doesn't get completely screwed over by any Shaymins. Maybe there is a Manectric deck that comes along, which is built really well, and manages to avoid all of the Groudons. Maybe there's a really well-made Trevenant deck that comes out and just beats the lot of them. Although I still think Trevenant will probably lose to Groudon. I don't know is the honest answer. But if I had to guess, I'd go Seismitoad. And just because it's a little tradition here is your list of... And I do this every year. Here is your list of things to take to Nationals. You want your deck. It's quite important. You want some dice. Remember that a flipping dice needs to be different to your damage dice. Also, burn and poison counters. If you are inflicting them, it is your responsibility. So if you're not playing a deck with any special conditions, you don't need to remember these. But if you're playing laser, take a poison counter. It is on the person inflicting the status condition to have the marker. Make sure you take some sleeves. Make sure you take some spare sleeves. You will probably rip one during the day. Take an entire new set of sleeves for if your judge makes you re-sleeve, especially relevant if you make top cut. Make sure you take any techs you are thinking of using, but be careful. Last minute changes to your deck are rarely a good idea. And take your good luck charms, like my little Fampy Ball or my Mama Swine plushie. I don't care that most of us are grown-ups. We've got real jobs and degrees and all that rubbish. Or at least some of us have. You know, a lot of players I meet have. A lot of players I meet are essentially proper grown-ups with jobs and degrees. Some have mortgages and girlfriend. Many have children's. But we all like our good luck charms, damn it. So don't be too much of a grown-up to use them. And at 107 minutes, I think my pre-Nationals podcast is probably over for another year. If I haven't mentioned it already, I can't remember if I have or not, but check out my YouTube channel. Just search PTCG Radio on YouTube. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at TheWassy, and check both Twitter and Burbank City Gym next Saturday, UK time. It could be starting as early as 10, 11 o'clock in the morning for the UK National stream featuring me. I will be putting out all the details as soon as I get them over Twitter, and I will make sure that if nobody else has, I will post them in the Burbank City Gym Facebook group. They are the 2 best places to get the information for this particular stream. Do bear in mind that a lot of people post on Burbank City Gym, so even when I post, you could end up having a bunch of people posting right after pushing it down, so do scroll down a bit and check. Good luck to all of my friends and podcast listeners at UK Nationals. Not good luck to the rest, because quite frankly, I want one of my listeners or friends to win Nationals, and if that makes me sound like a terrible person, so be it. I hope at least that everybody has fun when they go, and I will of course be back next week with all the results from UK Nationals. Until then, I've got at least 3 more YouTube videos going up before Saturday, and then on Saturday and Sunday, I'll hopefully be spending all day talking to you on the live stream from UK National. So you haven't heard the last of me before next Wednesday. But until then, look after yourselves. Thank you very much for listening. My name's Ross, and you've been listening to PTCG Radio.